My name is Harold Whitman, and the day I came home to find my workshop padlocked, I stood there longer than I care to admit, staring at a piece of metal that suddenly felt heavier than it should have been. The lock was new, shiny, the kind you buy when you want to make a point. I held my keys in my hand, anyway, even though I already knew none of them would fit. For 32 years, that workshop had never been locked to me, not once. I built it with my own hands behind the house, board by board, after my daughter was born. It was the one place in my life that had always made sense. The driveway was quiet. Late afternoon. The kind of stillness where you can hear your own breathing. My wife, Ellen, used to say she could always tell when I was upset because I stopped moving. I guess she was right. I didn't knock on the door right away. I didn't call out. I just stood there, the smell of sawdust still faint in the air, like I hadn't realized yet that it wasn't welcome anymore. That morning had started like any other. Coffee gone lukewarm on the counter. The radio murmuring about traffic I didn't need to worry about anymore. Retirement had slowed things down, but it hadn't taken away my routines. I'd gone to the hardware store for sandpaper and a small can of varnish. I was restoring an old rocking horse, one I'd promised my grandson even before he was born. I remember thinking, as I drove back, that it felt good to still be needed for something simple and honest. When I pulled into driveway, the first thing I noticed was a box truck, parked crooked, engine ticking as it cooled. The second thing was the pink curtains in the window facing the backyard. They hadn't been there before. I remember squinting, like that might change what I was seeing. Then I walked around back, and that's when I saw the padlock. I tried the door anyway. Habit, I guess. The handle didn't move. The lock clicked once, sharp and final. That sound settled somewhere deep in my chest. I rested my forehead against the wood for just a second. Not long. Just long enough to realize that something had shifted, and nobody had thought it necessary to tell me. Inside the house, voices drifted through the open kitchen window. My son's voice, tired. My daughter-in-law's voice, bright and busy, layered over his. I heard my wife laugh. It sounded thinner than usual. I stepped away from the workshop and walked toward the back door, wiping my hands on my jeans even though they weren't dirty. The kitchen smelled like baby powder and something sweet, maybe cake frosting. Boxes were stacked along the wall. A folded crib leaned against the counter. My daughter-in-law, Rachel, stood in the middle of it all, hands on her hips, surveying the room like a general pleased with her progress. She smiled when she saw me, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Oh," she said, "you're back." I nodded. Looks like I missed something. My son, David, avoided my eyes. He was fiddling with his phone, even though the screen was dark. My wife stood by the sink, drying the same plate over and over again. Rachel spoke before anyone else could. We made a decision. The baby needs more space. Light. That workshop was just sitting there. Just sitting there. I looked at her, then at David. I was working in there. I said. My voice sounded steady, which surprised me. Every day. She waved a hand. "Well, you can find somewhere else to tinker. This is different. This is a nursery." I waited for someone to say something else. For my son to clear his throat and explain. For my wife to step in. Instead, the refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a floorboard creaked. "You locked it," I said. Rachel tilted her head. "Of course we did. There are tools in there. It's not safe." "For who?" I asked. "For the baby," she said, like the answer was obvious. "And honestly, Harold, it's time you adjusted. This house isn't just yours anymore." That was the moment, not the lock, not the curtains. That sentence. I felt it land, slow and heavy. I thought about the nights I'd stayed up late fixing broken chairs, building shelves, repairing toys. I thought about the first crib I'd ever made years ago, when David was on the way. I'd sanded every edge until it was smooth enough to trust with my own hands. David finally spoke. "Dad, it's just temporary." I looked at him. Really looked. He had dark circles under his eyes. New fatherhood was already wearing him down. I understood that. What I didn't understand was how easy it had been for him to hand over the key or take it away. How long? I asked. Rachel shrugged. However long it needs to be. I nodded once, not because I agreed, because there was nothing else to do in that moment. I set the bag from the hardware store on the table. The sandpaper slid out, landing near the crib instructions. I'll be outside, I said. No one stopped me. I walked back to the workshop and sat on the old wooden step beside it. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the yard. I ran my fingers along the grain of the door. I could still picture everything inside. The bench, the half-finished rocking horse, the pencil marks on the wall where I'd measure my daughter's height year after year, back when she'd come to visit every summer. That was when it hit me. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. A realization that I wasn't just being moved out of a room. I was being moved aside. That night at dinner, conversation stayed on safe ground. Doctor appointments. Paint colors. Baby names they hadn't settled on yet. I chewed my food and nodded when expected. My wife didn't look at me. Not once. When the dishes were done, she followed me into the living room and sat beside me on the couch. I didn't know how to stop it, she said softly. I stared at the television, though it wasn't on. You didn't try. She flinched. They need help. They're starting a family. So did we, I said. Once. She reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. I didn't squeeze back either. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the rocking horse, about the promise I'd made to a child who wasn't even born yet, about the padlock gleaming in the sun like a warning. Sometime before dawn, I got up and sat at the kitchen table, the house quiet around me. I realized that if I didn't do something, truly do something, I was going to disappear inside my own life. And the worst part was knowing they thought I already had. I didn't confront anyone the next morning. I didn't raise my voice or demand the key back. I made coffee, the same way I always did, and sat at the table while the house slowly woke up. My son rushed out first, tie crooked, eyes already elsewhere. He barely noticed me. Rachel followed later, rubbing her stomach, talking into her phone about paint samples and delivery times. The word nursery floated through the air like a final decision already approved by the world. When the door closed behind them, the house went quiet again. Too quiet. My wife sat across from me, hands folded around her mug. She looked older than she had a week ago. Not in years. In weight. I'll talk to them, she said finally. I nodded, though I didn't believe it would change anything. You should have talked to me first. She swallowed. I didn't think they'd go that far. Neither did I, and that was on me. After breakfast, I walked down the hall and opened the closet where I kept my old toolbox, the one I'd carried with me through 3 houses and one life I barely recognized anymore. Inside were screws sorted by size, a worn tape measure, and a small envelope I hadn't opened in years. I took it out and turned it over my hands. That envelope held the deed, not the house, the land behind it, the section where the workshop sat. My father had left it to me separately years ago when he passed. Said it was important a man always had one thing that was his. I'd never mentioned it. Not to my wife. Not to my son. It hadn't seemed necessary. Family was family. Ownership felt like a technicality. Until it didn't. I sat back down at the table and opened the envelope. The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly faded, but the words were clear enough. That workshop wasn't just something I'd built. It was something I legally owned. Entirely. No shared names. No conditions. For a long moment, I just stared at it, not with satisfaction, with sadness. I wonder how things had reached a point where I even needed to think about this. That afternoon, I drove into town, not to the hardware store, to a small office near the courthouse, one I'd passed 100 times without ever needing to go inside. The man behind the desk was polite, professional, and asked me questions without judgment. When I slid the deed across to him, his eyebrows lifted slightly. Still valid, he said. Clear as day. I nodded. What were my options? He explained them carefully. Slowly. I listened. I didn't interrupt. By the time I left, The sun was already dipping low, and my chest felt tight in a way I couldn't quite name. Not fear, not relief, responsibility. When I pulled back into the driveway, the box truck was gone. The pink curtains glowed softly from inside the workshop window. That sight did something to me, something sharp. I parked the car and sat there for a minute, hands on the steering wheel, breathing. Inside, Rachel was on the floor, sorting tiny clothes into neat piles. She looked up, surprised to see me home so early. "Hey," she said, "we made progress. You should see we need to talk," I said. She hesitated, then stood. My son appeared in the doorway, sensing the shift in the air. My wife hovered behind him, her face already tense. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "That workshop," I said, "is not part of this house." Rachel frowned. "What do you mean?" I continued, "it's on land that belongs to me, not us. Me." David looked between us. "Dad, I let you use it," I said. "I never gave it away." Rachel crossed her arms. "We didn't know that." "You didn't ask," I replied. Silence settled in, thick, uncomfortable. "I went to town today," I said. I had some things clarified. I'm not saying this to threaten you. I'm saying it because I need you to understand something. I'm not a piece of furniture you can move when it's inconvenient. My wife's eyes filled with tears. David looked at the floor. Rachel's jaw tightened. "So what?" she said. "You're kicking your grandchild out of nursery." I shook my head. "I'm asking for respect. And space. The same kind I gave you when you moved in." David finally spoke, his voice low. "Rachel, maybe we went too far." She turned on him. "You're taking his side now." "I'm taking responsibility," he said. And for the first time in a long while, I heard something solid in his voice. That night, no one slept well. I heard whispered arguments through the walls, doors opening and closing. Sometime after midnight, my wife came and sat beside me on the bed. "I'm sorry," she said. "I forgot who you were." I took her hand then. This time, I squeezed it. The next morning, the padlock was gone. The door to the workshop stood open, sunlight spilling onto the floor. Inside, the rocking horse waited where I'd left it, untouched. Rachel stood in the doorway, her expression guarded but quieter than before. "We'll figure something else out," she said. "For the baby." I nodded. "I'll help when I'm asked." She hesitated, then nodded back. Later that day, my grandson kicked for the first time. They felt it together, laughing softly in the living room. I stayed in my workshop, sanding the curve of the rocking horse until it was smooth enough to trust with my hands. Because some things, I realized, aren't about winning. They're about being seen. And sometimes, the biggest mistake people make is assuming the quiet ones have nothing left to stand on.